The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, says the United States must see some sort of positive action from North Korea before any discussions to lower tensions on the Korean Peninsula can begin. Haley spoke this week after an emergency closed-door briefing among members of the UN Security Council, where she referred to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as, quote, not a rational person. Just a few days earlier, North Korea fired 4 medium-range ballistic missiles, 3 of which flew about 1,000 kilometers and landed in Japanese waters. South Korea's military says the missiles were launched from a region near the North's border with China. So the question a lot of people are asking right now is the U.S. and North Korea headed towards a collision? For perspective, we are joined in our studio by VOA White House Bureau Chief Steve Herman and by the host of VOA's Asia in a Minute, Steve Miller. I thank you both gentlemen for joining us.
Certainly.
Steve, I want to start with you because the White House has responded to the latest round of North Korean missile launches by saying the threat from Pyongyang has entered a new phase. Now, what does that mean when it comes from the administration?
It's a little puzzling because while initially there was concern that the launch that had occurred from North Korea was an ICBM, but it turns out they're probably more Scud missiles. So according to the open source intelligence, there's nothing indicating that this particular launch was something new and significant in that regard.
Or an escalation of these tests. So I'm wondering, Steve, whether or not this is sort of justification by the White House for the deployment of this THAAD missile system.
Well, the THAAD missile system had been scheduled to roll out this year regardless of any new launches. And Acting President Hwang Kyo-ahn had set aside sometime this summer for the first phase to roll out. So having these 4 ballistic missiles being launched this week was an opportunity to go ahead and speed it up after the land swap deal between the Lotte Corporation and the government to house this first installation.
But Steve Herman, it seems rather interesting that China is sort of playing referee here. I mean, isn't China normally on North Korea's side?
Well, there's been a lot of frustration in Beijing in recent years with North Korea, and there's really no one else who has the credibility to be a potential referee. The Russians have been way out on the sidelines of the Korea tensions for many years, so it is really up to the Chinese here.
So, Steve Miller, does China sort of playing this role suggest that it may be losing some influence over its ally?
Well, I spoke with a number of analysts last week, and they said essentially what they're looking for in regards to North Korean behavior is how it affects their personal interests, how it affects Chinese interests. And as long as North Korean behavior doesn't perform to a detriment to Chinese interests, they're willing to allow Kim Jong-un to continue certain behaviors without stepping in.
So, Steve, why is the THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, such a threat to China?
Well, I think the Chinese would object to even another Jeep coming onto the Korean Peninsula from the United States. But in this case, the system, the radar reach does go into Chinese territory. So that is a concern for them. But the State Department, the Defense Department, and others have said this is not a threat to China. It is because of North Korea, and it is wrong for the Chinese to portray it as a threat.
I'm wondering if Steve, China's opposition to this THAAD missile system is hurting relations with their South Korean counterparts. I mean, China is the largest trading partner for South Korea, correct?
Well, there are a number of politicians in South Korea who certainly view that as much. In fact, there are a number of politicians considering going to the World Trade Organization to file a complaint over what they perceive is an economic retaliation by China. This past week, roughly 25% of Lotte stores in China that does some $2.6 billion worth of trade were closed for alleged fire safety violations. There have been a number of K-pop and other performances canceled in China. There's been cancellations of flights between the two countries. So from a South Korean perspective, there is an economic retaliation taking place.
And as if things were not complicated enough, there's also a lot of political stuff going on. The impeachment proceedings of the President Park Geun-hye has actually gone ahead. You can both answer.
She's out. The
She's out,
Constitutional
right?
Court has determined Friday in Seoul that she must leave Blue House, and there will be an election probably on May 9th.
Now, Steve Miller, she was a big supporter of this missile defense system. How does that impact this now that you have other candidates?
Well, the opposition party had called for suspension of the THAAD deployment during the impeachment proceedings, and now they're saying, well, until a new president is elected, perhaps we should stop further deployment. So it's unclear what will happen. The opposition party has said they want to take into consideration China's viewpoints because of the economic ties.
I think that Park Geun-hye's removal is probably being seen as good news in Pyongyang because she was a hardliner, and they're hoping that a more liberal government will get in the May election that'll be more accommodating to perhaps negotiating with North Korea.
Steve, the other issue that seems to be gaining a lot of traction, at least as we go to air, is the diplomatic tensions between Malaysia right now and North Korea. What can you tell us is going on there?
Well, essentially, we have a very strange and tension-filled situation where both countries are effectively holding diplomats of the other country hostage. This stemming from the assassination of Kim Jong-nam at the
So
Kuala
diplomats
Lumpur
from either
airport.
side are not allowed to leave.
That's correct.
What does that mean in terms of international geopolitical kinds of...
Well, it's obviously something very serious, potentially a violation of international conventions affecting diplomats. Now, Malaysia is insisting that it will not break diplomatic ties with North Korea. They had this good relationship, visa-free entry between the two countries, but we're one step away now from a severing of diplomatic ties.
I've been told to wrap, Steve Miller, but in 10 seconds, what's in store for South Korea over the coming weeks?
Well, there's going to be a lot of jockeying for political position, uncertainty with that, uncertainty with North Korea. The nation itself has put itself on a security alert, bewaring of North Korean hacking attempts.
Uncertainty being the key word. Thank you, Steve Herman and Steve Miller. I'm pretty sure we'll be talking more about those issues fairly soon.